Hello and welcome to Love Thy Lawyer, where we talk to real lawyers about their lives in and out of the practice of law, how they got to be lawyers, and what their experience has been. I'm Goodman, the host of the show, and yes, I'm a lawyer. Nobody's perfect. He has served as an elected official for the city of Emeryville. He served as an associate deputy public defender in Alameda County. He oversaw and directed the Alameda County Bar Association's court-appointed attorneys program. He has run a private practice handling civil litigation and transactional work for small and medium-sized businesses. He swims, skis, cycles, hikes, and bakes bread. He has lived in Seoul, Rotterdam, and Paris. And in addition to the King's English, he speaks French and Lithuanian. John Fricke, welcome to Love Thy Lawyer.
Thank you for having me, Louis. I'm really flattered that you invited me.
Well, it's a pleasure having you on. I've always been interested in you ever since Hal Friedman, who at that time was, I think, second in command in the public defender's office, told me about this really promising great lawyer that he knew, and he was talking about you.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate to have Hal Friedman recommend me for various jobs, and others like Mike Bellacci and Greg Soren. It's really been great.
What sort of practice are you involved in right now? I know you've done lots of things over your career.
Well, since about a year ago, I have been actively engaged in the practice of taking care of a toddler, which has been a great joy.
And I suppose that's sort of different from practicing law.
It's very different, although, my toddler son, Dean, sometimes can exhibit similar temper fits to opposing counsel. I'm just thrilled to be able to spend time with him.
Where are you from originally?
I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I lived with my grandparents, who were from Lithuania, as was my mother, so I learned Lithuanian as a first language. My father was the son of German immigrants, and so my father talked English to my grandparents, and I spoke English with my father and Lithuanian with my grandparents, so there were a lot of different languages going on in my childhood.
Did you go to high school in Chicago?
I went to high school, so before high school, I walked to the local public school. But then for high school, I attended lab school, which is a private K-12 school affiliated with the University of Chicago. It was really great. I have to say that I really benefited tremendously from that experience. I learned critical thinking skills. I began to learn how to write, how to do research. The teachers at lab school fostered in me intellectual curiosity. I came to love learning at lab school. And that's where I learned to swim competitively. I was on the high school swim team.
When you graduated from lab school,
I went directly to college. I started at Northwestern as an engineering major, but I switched to liberal arts after 1 year.
And how was that? How'd that go?
It was great. I focused on, my major was in sociology, and I focused on urban studies. And I'm very much a product of the environment in Chicago where I grew up. So studying the city from more of an academic perspective, I really enjoyed that. So it was a great experience.
When did you start thinking about becoming a lawyer?
I started thinking about law school because I was learning about various things that affected cities. There was a landmark U.S. Supreme Court case that dealt with redlining, also restrictive covenants. There was a Supreme Court case on restrictive covenants, which essentially prohibited a residential property from being sold to a black family. So this piqued my interest in the law. I then had an opportunity to spend a summer working in the public defender's office in Cook County. And so it was a great opportunity to see up close a public defender's office in a very large criminal court.
Did you go directly to law school after you graduated from Northwestern?
I decided to take a year off, and so what I did was I got a job as a paralegal at MoFo in San Francisco. And during that time, I applied to law school, and the job at MoFo was eye-opening. I worked on complex civil litigation cases, and it was enough for me to know that I certainly wanted to go to law school, maybe not work in a large corporate law firm, but I still was interested in law school.
So where did you go?
So I went to Matheson. I went back to the Midwest for law school, and that was, the first semester was daunting. It was the amount of work was much more obviously than college, but I managed that by swimming regularly. That helped the stress level, and I enjoyed the classes. By and large, it was a good experience.
Do you think that having worked for a year in the law at a firm helped you in terms of dealing with law school and focusing in law school?
Well, so there obviously there were certain classes that like the civil procedure class, I had come across quite a bit of what was covered in civil procedure when working on cases at MoFo. So the MoFo experience is still, it doesn't really cover quite a bit of what the broad range of what lawyers do.
When you finished law school, what was your first legal job? What sort of practice were you drawn to?
Well, so I came, directly from Madison, and I took the bar exam, and it turned out that my first job was in a small bankruptcy firm.
What drew you to California and the Bay Area?
So my father grew up in San Francisco, and we had visited family members here, and on one occasion he brought me to this community center in Chinatown where he had spent a good deal of time, and he said, this is something you may want to consider, working as a day camp leader for one summer. So I did that during college, and I fell in love with San Francisco.
Now, you've done some work in politics in addition to law. I mean, you worked for, at the time, Oakland Mayor Elihu Harris.
Yeah, so I basically have had law jobs where I was practicing as a lawyer, and then I had jobs where I was doing either public policy work or some sort of administrative responsibility, which was not practicing law, but the law training was extremely valuable. So I worked for a number of years for Elihu during his second term. I live in Emeryville, and so I got involved in local issues in Emeryville, and that led to my running for the city council. And then there was, you mentioned the job running the court-appointed program, and then the other thing that I did that was fascinating was I was working in the courts, and I was responsible for two aspects of the criminal courts, pretrial services and collaborative courts.
Well, let's just look into those things a little bit. So, City of Emeryville, the position as a council member, what prompted you to run for office in Emeryville?
I got involved in a number of issues that were happening at the time. I guess I was just, I kind of got incensed. There was definitely emotional investment on my part. I got incensed at various things that the city council was doing. And I knew from my experience in Chicago and reading Saul Alinsky, my training in college in urban studies, that to really affect change, I needed to organize. So I organized my neighbors, I collected email addresses, and got them to go to city council meetings. And so one issue came up after another, and so I just got sucked into it. And happily, voluntarily. And then I'd finally decided, well, I think I would enjoy being on the city council.
So how was running? Did you have to raise money and that sort of thing?
It's, Emeryville is really pretty small. I think it's about 10,000 people. The scale of a campaign is just not the same as if it would be in Oakland or even Berkeley. So it's kind of, I sometimes would equate it to Mayberry.
Did you run again, or did you decide that?
Well, so when I got onto the city council, the other 4 council members they kind of embraced, I'm going to generalize now, but they kind of embraced this ethos of a rising tide lifts all boats, very pro-developer, and I was agitating for more neighborhood-friendly policies. And I think that my council member colleagues, they were kind of expecting me to be quiet and learn the ropes for let's say a year. That idea, I forgot who it was that communicated that to me, and I had no interest in that. I came out swinging, and I had an email list. Now it was in the thousands, and I just was very clear the direction I wanted to go, and I kept rabble-rousing, and so it was confrontational.
When you left the city council in Emeryville, where did you go, and why?
So I was trying to get things done in Emeryville, and 2 years after I was elected, it was kind of payback time for me. I was stripped of a committee assignment. And then my wife at the time, she had an opportunity to do a sabbatical in Paris. And so I was deciding between a second term on the city council or a year living abroad in Paris. And so that was an easy choice for me. And so I chose to live in Paris.
How was living in Paris?
It was great. I improved my French, and I was taking care of my daughters who were in middle school, and I was swimming at the local pool. So it was fun. It was fun to explore Paris.
Now, you had lived in Rotterdam at some point, too. Was that before or after Paris?
Yeah, so Rotterdam was another sabbatical opportunity for my wife at the time, and it was when my daughters were 4 years old, and so that was a great experience because I was pretty much taking care of them most of the time, exploring all the playgrounds of Rotterdam, and I really enjoyed being an observer of how the city was organized, various things, various city functions, and that really informed the policy proposals that I was fronting when I was on the Emeryville City Council. Unfortunately, a lot of the ideas that I proposed didn't go very far, but that I really enjoyed seeing Rotterdam, riding my bicycle in Rotterdam on the separated bike paths. We had a bicycle trailer, so I was bringing my daughters to various places in the bicycle trailer. It was great.
Now, something that I think that a lot of people who are listening to this podcast might have some interest in was your experience as the director of the Alameda County Court-Appointed Program.
Yeah, that was a great experience. So I came back from Paris, and I was looking for a job. I forgot how long it was between coming back and getting this job, but I was one of the people that I had been in touch with since even before my public defender days was Mike Bellacci. So I heard about this opportunity, and they wanted a list of references. So I called Mike, and he gladly was a reference and asked me to tell him how the interview went. So I got an interview, and one of the people that interviewed me was Daryl Stallworth. And so I called Mike Bellacci, and I said, I met Daryl Stallworth. I hadn't known him before. And so sometime later, Mike Bellacci called me back, and he had called Daryl, and in his own inimitable way, he told Daryl, "You must hire John Fricke." And so it was so nice to have Mike in my corner. It was just great. So I got the job, and what I quickly realized was that the things that needed to be improved in the court-appointed program that I had observed 15 years before still hadn't really been addressed adequately. So the main issues were that the hourly rates that the court-appointed lawyers, that the county was paying the court-appointed lawyers, the hourly rates were too far below where they should be, and certainly below what other counties, comparable counties, were paying. I also observed that there wasn't really a good way to evaluate lawyers, their performance, and figure out and to kind of evaluate them and to figure out who should be given more senior, the heavier cases, and also the whole project or the program was very paper driven, and that was something that needed to be dragged into the computer age.
Yeah, I remember I was on the advisory committee at the time when you were there, and I always thought you had done a really, really good job with that, and you really did manage to drag the program into the computer age.
Yeah, I really enjoyed working with the committee that oversaw it. There were 9 lawyers, and it was Daryl Stallworth and yourself and Susan Sawyer, Jared Winter, and Paul Wellenkamp, and it was just a great exchange of ideas. I would share with you all my ideas, and there was a very robust debate about which way the program should go, and it was really a fun job. I really enjoyed it.
You've also done a substantial amount of work with seniors at Contra Costa Senior Legal Services and also with legal assistance for seniors. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that experience.
The next job I had was basically it was legal aid for the elderly. I was working in Concord, and it was for Contra Costa. And it was a great change because I suddenly went, for the public defender job, it sometimes would feel like I was wearing the black hat. And going from that to representing seniors, I felt like I had the white hat because there was a lot of goodwill towards the elderly. And so I had cases involving eviction, the unlawful detainer cases, and a bunch of different cases. It was just whatever would come up in Concord. And the clients all were just extremely appreciative and all, just repeatedly thanking me, something that did not always happen when I was in the public defender's office.
Yeah.
And so that was a breath of fresh air. And so that was a great job, and I really enjoyed that. But then I got a call out of the blue from Morris Jacobson to work for the courts, and so that was a good opportunity.
And what did you do for the courts?
So at the time, the Alameda County Superior Court had been given a grant from the Judicial Council to implement a different approach to pretrial services. And so that grant money started flowing, and the person that was running it left, and it was kind of cast adrift. And at the time, Morris Jacobson was the presiding judge, and so he thought of me because I had interacted with him as part of the court-appointed program. He was at that time he was the presiding judge of the criminal courts, and so I met with him in connection with that. I guess he remembered me, and so it was very flattering that he thought of me for this job. And so I started there, and right before I started, I was told that I would be responsible not just for pretrial services, but for collaborative courts. And so that was great. I really enjoyed working with Greg Soren because I knew him from the public defender's office. And so I just enjoyed working with Greg and the person who runs the collaborative courts, the staff members of the courts. Gavin O'Neill was a great person to work with. I nominally supervised Gavin, but I quickly learned that he really was doing a great job, so I just tried to stay out of his way.
Yeah, that's always a good idea as a supervisor. I want to shift gears here a little bit. What sort of things do you do and have you done as a lawyer to, keep your head together, recreational sorts of things, family sorts of things?
Ever since high school, when I was on the swim team, I've always found swimming regularly to be a great way to clear my head. And so for many years, I swam at the local public pool in Oakland, Temescal Pool, and did so up until they closed because of the pandemic. And so for the past year, I've been swimming at the Temescal, and not at Temescal, at the Emeryville Pool, and that's been great. So that's been kind of my release in terms of physical activity. And you asked about my family life. I'm extremely blessed. I am married to an environmental lawyer, Andrea Isad. She works for the Sierra Club, and she is great. She listens to all of my ramblings and is willing to go with me to the dark and depressing movies where nothing happens. She's really she's kind of like Tigger to my Eeyore.
If a young person was thinking about a career choice, would you recommend going into law?
Yeah, I would recommend it. I find that people that are considering law school, they realize that they're predisposed to law school. There's that famous scene in Paper Chase where John Houseman plays the contracts professor, and he says something like, you come to law school and your head is full of mush, and you leave thinking like a lawyer. Well, I think that actually lawyers exist before law school. They know they're lawyers, and that's why they go to law school. And law school doesn't make them lawyers. It just works on honing their innate lawyer qualities.
What do you think's the best advice that you've ever received?
The best advice I got was from Hal Friedman, who said that I was just started as a public defender, and he said that you start, and from 1 to 10, the score, your score in terms of trust is a 5, and you then need to work on improving that score, and doing so by, not misleading, being candid, and whatnot, and that if you fail to do that, your trust score will plummet very quickly, but it takes a very long time to cause your trust score to work up from 5 up to where it could be and where it should be, and where it then becomes more pleasant to be practicing with colleagues.
I think that is good advice. Do you think the legal system is fair? You've seen it from a lot of different aspects, a lot of different vantage points. Do you think it's fair?
So when you say fair, I think that it is getting at whether similarly situated people are treated the same. And I think the answer is pretty clearly no. There are many variables that, who the judge is and what his or her disposition towards the case is in the criminal realm, who the DA is, the defense lawyer. All of these variables can affect how a person is treated by the system. And so I don't think that similarly situated people are treated the same. I think what is lacking is a focus on when people get the short end of the stick, how are they treated? Well, clearly the system deals with that with direct appeals and with habeas corpus, but there are a lot of cases, a lot of people that really don't have those remedies, either because they've taken a plea bargain, and so I think that the legal system does not do a great job at figuring out how to make sure that that the cases that get the short end of the stick are not dealt with well.
Let's say you came into some real money, a few $1 billion. What, if anything, would you do differently in your life?
Well, thankfully, we are blessed with having enough money. So I don't think I would do anything differently. More money would just be a burden. I would have to figure out where to donate it.
Let's say you had a magic wand. There was one thing in the world that you could change, in the legal world or the outside world, anything. What one thing would you change?
I think the one thing I would change is I would address, with my swish of my magic wand, I would make sure that girls in the world were educated. And the reason I focus on girls specifically is that in a lot of places in the world, the girls are denied education, specifically, either because of various factors or very intentionally, like, for example, the Taliban in Afghanistan. And a lot of research has found that when a society educates girls specifically, there are a lot of improvements that occur in terms of poverty levels and whatnot. So that would be the one thing I would do is to make sure that girls get education, until the age of 18 and any more education that they would like to have.
I just have a comment about a couple of things that you've said. One is about lawyers being born, not made, and I really agree with that. And in talking to people for this podcast, that point of view gets confirmed over and over again. Yeah, and with respect to your comment about if you came into several $1 billion, what you would do with it, I think your answer really lines up very closely with mine. There's not much that I would really do differently in my life if I really came into big money. Not that that's going to happen. And I'm really grateful for being in a sort of comfortable financial position without billions of dollars. And I think the things, at least in my own life, that I want, and maybe you're like this too, are things that money can't really buy. Health, recreation, satisfaction with work, those sorts of things.
Yeah, I really am thankful for what I have. It's really important to remind myself of that. My daughters are 20 now, and they're in college, and I sometimes see photos of them when they were toddlers, and I see those photos and I think, oh, wouldn't it be great to go back in time and to talk to them and interact with them when they were that age, to go to the playground in Rotterdam that we would go to. And then I realized that my wish has been granted. I have a toddler, and it's just a joy to spend time with him. It can be taxing at times. He is, certainly not immune to meltdowns and temper fits and accidents. But it's really great to have him. And
it's interesting too to middle-aged guys talking to each other about girls' education, but I agree with you 100% about educating girls, and I think that when you look at societies that educate girls, they are so far ahead of societies that don't educate girls. And when I think about my own scholastic upbringing, I think of the, kids I was in school with, and I just remember the girls being really, really talented students.
Yeah, I think that it's important to focus on treating people well and treating people equally. But I think it's also important to recognize differences and see that there's value in the differences that different groups bring to society. And I think that there are values that girls and women bring to society that is informed by their perspective and how they're raised. I think that there's I think in terms of the nature-nurture debate, I fall more on the nurture side. So I don't think that it's necessarily innate aspects of either being a man or a woman or a particular group, ethnic group, racial group, but still those things need to be recognized and celebrated.
John Fricke, thanks so much for joining me today on the Love Thy Lawyer podcast. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me, Louis, and thank you for doing these podcasts. I realize that it takes a lot of time from the time that you interview to the editing process, and so I just wanted to acknowledge the time that you put into it, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Love Thy Lawyer. If you enjoyed listening, please share it with a friend and subscribe to the podcast. If you have comments or suggestions, send me an email. I promise I'll respond. Take a look at our website at lovethylawyer.com, where you can find all of our episodes, transcripts, photographs, and information. Thanks as always to my guests who share their wisdom, and to Joel Katz for music, Bryan Matheson for technical support, and Tracy Harvey. I'm Louis Goodman.
So I was a bankruptcy lawyer for a time, but then I got laid off from that job, and I was then, looking for other jobs.